Marcus did not ask permission. He simply reached into his breast pocket mid-ceremony, pulled out a folded photograph, and laid it flat on the altar, like a man closing a business deal. The officiant hadn't even finished the question. "Does anyone object?" Marcus raised his own hand. 250 people went silent so fast you could hear the candles flickering. Adriana Voss stood at that altar in her high-necked lace gown, dark hair swept clean off her face, and she watched her groom of 3 years place a photograph of another woman between them like it was a verdict. Her sharp cheekbones caught the light. Her chin didn't drop. She was, even now, breathtaking, the kind of woman a room reorganizes itself around without meaning to. Marcus took the officiant's microphone without asking. "I can't do this," he said. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "I've been in love with someone else for 11 months. I tried to end it. I couldn't." He looked at Adriana then, not with guilt, but with something almost worse, relief. "You deserve to know before the vows. That's the kindest thing I can do for you." The kindest thing. Someone in the third row made a sound like they'd been struck. Adriana's mother stood up and immediately sat back down. Her father's hand found the edge of the pew. Adriana didn't move. Not one step, not one word. She simply stood there with 250 pairs of eyes pressing into her like thumbs, and she let one single tear fall. Straight down her cheek, slow and deliberate, like it too had too much dignity to hurry. Phones rose. Of course they did. Marcus set the microphone down gently on the altar, straightened his jacket, and walked away from her. Down the aisle. Past his own mother. Past the white flower arrangements she had spent 4 weekends choosing. Out the double doors at the back of the venue, which swung shut behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. His groomsmen looked at each other, then at Adriana. Then they followed him. The congregation didn't know whether to stand, sit, speak, or stare. So they did all 4, badly, at the same time. Someone started crying. Someone else started whispering loud enough to be a second ceremony. She must have known. 11 months, did he say? Someone should go after him. Adriana heard all of it. Every word. How she was still standing at the altar, a bride with no groom and 250 witnesses to the fact. And she could feel the moment beginning to harden around her like concrete setting. If she stood here one more second, she would become the story. She would become the photograph someone's cousin posts tonight with the caption, "Can you imagine?" She turned. She was going to walk out, not after Marcus, just out. Through a side door, through a wall if she had to, anywhere that wasn't this altar. A hand closed around her wrist. Not rough, not grabbing, just present. A large hand, the knuckles marked with dark tattoo ink, the grip firm enough to stop her momentum without hurting her. "Don't," said a voice behind her. Low, certain, the kind of voice that had never needed to be loud to be heard. Adriana turned. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, dressed entirely in black with no tie, no boutonniere, no reason whatsoever to be in this room. Dark beard, jaw set, a neck tattoo she recognized as intentional rather than impulsive. He wasn't one of Marcus's people. He wasn't one of hers. She had never seen him before in her life. His eyes were on her, not the crowd. Dark and steady, the way a man looks when he has walked into 100 difficult rooms and learned to read all of them. "Let go of me." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Controlled. "I'm leaving." "I know," he said. "Just not that way." She tried to pull her wrist free. His hand didn't tighten. It just didn't release either. That specific kind of grip that isn't a threat, but isn't a question. "That way," he said, tilting his head toward the doors Marcus had just walked through, "is 100 camera phones and his family's version of events. You walk out those doors in the next 60 seconds. That's the photo. That's the headline. Abandoned bride chases groom into the street." Adriana went still, not because she was afraid of him, because he was right. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who was not performing concern. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't excited by the drama the way the room behind her was. He was simply standing in front of her with the quiet authority of someone who had already decided what happened next and was waiting for her to catch up. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer that. Not yet. Instead, he did something she didn't expect. He turned, still holding her wrist lightly, sought as if to simply make sure she didn't bolt. And he faced the congregation, all 250 of them, all the phones, all the whispers. The room went quiet again. There was something about the way he stood, like the air rearranged itself around him. He walked, and somehow she was walking with him, not pulled, not led, just moving in the same direction, because not moving felt like the worse option. He walked down the aisle toward the altar she had just abandoned, up the 2 marble steps, and he turned to face the room from the spot where Marcus had stood 10 minutes ago. The officiant took 1 step back, then another. Damien Rourke looked at Adriana. He held out his hand to her, palm open, fingers relaxed, and the gesture was so quiet, so absent of theatrics, that it took her a full 3 seconds to understand what he was doing. She looked at his hand, then at his face. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then why?" "Because you're still standing," he said, "and you shouldn't have to do it alone." Adriana Voss had spent 27 years being composed, being careful, being the version of herself that other people found easy to approve of. She had chosen Marcus because he was safe and legible, and her mother liked him and the timeline made sense. She looked at this stranger's open hand, and she placed hers in it. His palm was warm, calloused. His fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything else about him. The ink, the jaw, the way the room had gone silent the moment he stood up. He turned to the officiant. "Continue," he said, not a request. The officiant opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the congregation, and then the back doors burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his face the specific color of a man who has just been told something that changed the temperature of the room he was walking back into. His best man was 2 steps behind him, phone in hand, face pale. Marcus pointed at the altar, at Damien, at Adriana's hand inside Damien's hand. "What is this?" His voice cracked on the second word. "What is this?" Damien did not look at him immediately. He finished holding Adriana's gaze for 1 more second, calm, unhurried, as if Marcus's entrance was a minor weather event. And then he turned. Just turned. That was all. Marcus stopped walking. Something crossed his face. His best man grabbed his arm and leaned in, whispering, "Gano," and whatever name he said made Marcus's expression change completely. The red in his cheeks drained. His pointing hand dropped slowly to his side. "You walked away," Damien said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It filled the entire hall the way cold fills a room. Not loudly, but completely. "You made your choice in front of every person here. You said the words. You laid down the photograph. You left." He paused. "She's mine now." The words landed like a key turning in a lock. Quiet, final, structural. "And you just made the worst mistake of your life." Marcus looked at Adriana. She met his eyes and felt nothing she expected to feel. No desperation, no pull. Just the strange, grounded sensation of standing next to something immovable. Marcus looked at his best man. His best man looked at the floor. And Marcus Hale, knee for the second time that afternoon, turned and walked out of the room. This time, he did not come back. The doors closed. In the silence that followed, Damien turned to Adriana. And for just a moment, in the privacy of 2 people standing close in a very crowded room, his expression shifted. Not soft, exactly, but present. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She almost laughed. She didn't. "Who are you?" she asked instead. "Damien Rourke." She watched his face. "I'm supposed to know that name." "Most people do," he said, Eventually, she looked down at their joined hands. He was still holding hers. She hadn't pulled away. Why? The question formed in her throat and almost made it out. He answered it anyway. Because no one gets to humiliate someone like that and walk away clean, he said quietly. Not in front of me. Adriana felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, not gratitude, but something harder to name. Something that felt uncomfortably like the first honest breath she'd taken all day. I don't need rescuing, she said. I know, Damien said. That's not what this is. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind them, 250 people were very loudly pretending not to listen. Then what is it? She asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. A door, he said finally. That's all. You can walk through it, or you can walk away from it. Either way, I'll make sure you get out of this room without becoming their story. Adriana Voss, architect 27, composed to the point of fault, looked at the stranger who had just turned her worst moment into something else entirely. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't chosen it, but she had spent 3 years choosing the careful thing, the approved thing, the thing that made sense on paper. And she knew, with a clarity that surprised her, exactly what she was choosing right now. She turned to the efficient. You heard him, she said. Continue. The groom didn't realize who he had just offended. But more than that, he had no idea what he had just set free. The ceremony didn't happen. The officiant had looked between Adriana and Damien, then at the 250 people sitting in stunned silence, and made the quiet, sensible decision that whatever was unfolding in his venue today was above his pay grade. He'd murmured something about paperwork and licenses and stepped away from the altar with the careful speed of a man who had decided this was not his problem. Adriana didn't push it. Neither did Damien. What happened instead was this. The congregation unfroze. All at once, the way ice cracks, not gradually but completely, a single moment where everything that had been held in suspension released simultaneously into noise and movement. Her mother's voice rose above everything else, high and stretched, calling her name. Her father was already on his feet and moving. Marcus's relatives were clustering near the doors, heads bent together, mouths moving fast. Adriana felt it coming, the wave of it, all those people and all their feelings and all their opinions about what had just happened to her. And she made a decision in the space between one breath and the next. She was not going to be standing here when it arrived. She turned and walked off the altar through the side door before anyone reached her. The hallway behind the main hall was service width, narrow, fluorescent lit, smelling faintly of cleaning product and old carpet. There was a folding table against one wall, with a half-empty water jug on it and a stack of unused programs that said Marcus and Adriana, June 14th in the font she had spent 2 hours selecting. She stopped when she reached it, and then, because there was no one watching, she let herself shake. It started in her hands. That fine, cellular trembling that the body produces when it has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and is finally, briefly, allowed to put it down. She pressed her palms flat against the folding table and breathed. Not evenly, not composedly, just breathed, and let the shaking move through her like weather passing. She didn't cry. She'd already done the one tear. That was all Marcus was getting. She heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around. She already knew, somehow, the particular quality of his footfall. Unhurried, taking up exactly the space it needed and no more. He set something on the table beside her hands, a glass of water filled from the jug. He hadn't asked if she wanted it. He just put it there. She looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and drank half of it. He owed money, Damien said, to a man I know. He wasn't standing close. He'd left a full arm's length between them, his back against the opposite wall, arms loose at his sides. A significant amount. I came here to have a conversation with him before the reception. I was going to leave after. Adriana set the glass down. And then? And then I didn't leave. She finally turned to look at him. In the fluorescent light, with no congregation watching, she could see him more clearly. The neck tattoo was a large lotus, intricate and deliberate, climbing from collarbone to jaw. The ink on his hands was older, darker, the kind that had been there long enough to become part of the skin rather than on top of it. He was watching her with that same quality of attention she'd noticed at the altar. Not sympathy, not fascination, just accuracy. Like he was seeing exactly what was there and not adding anything to it. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "When I walked back through the main doors," he said, "Marcus's aunt was already telling 3 people that you'd had some kind of breakdown, that you'd been unstable for months, that Marcus had been trying to manage it." Adriana went very still. "That's not what I saw," Damien said. "I saw a woman standing at an altar while someone else fell apart. I thought someone should have seen the same thing." She absorbed that. The shaking in her hands had mostly stopped. "You don't know me," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact she needed to put on the table. "No," he agreed, "but I know what I watched happen in that room, and I know the difference between a woman having a breakdown and a woman deciding not to give anyone the satisfaction." Adriana looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the stack of programs on the table. Marcus and Adriana, June 14th. She picked up the top one, looked at it once, and set it face down. "There are cameras at the front entrance," she said. It wasn't a question. "So 3 that I counted, plus roughly 40 guests who have their phones out and are waiting for you to come through those doors, so they have something to caption. My mother is in that room." "Yes." "Marcus's family is in that room." "Also yes. And they're currently building a story that does not have you in a flattering light. The longer you're not visible, the more room they have to build it." She understood what he was telling her. The front exit was a gauntlet. Her mother's grief, Marcus's family's spin, 40 phone cameras, and the particular social violence of becoming someone else's content before she'd had 60 seconds to process what had just happened to her. She looked at the narrow hallway stretching ahead of her, past the folding table, toward the building's service exit. "Is there a back way out of this building?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I already know where it comes out." Of course he did. "Take me there," she said. The service exit opened onto a side street. The afternoon light hit her like something physical, bright and indifferent, and completely unimpressed by what had just happened inside. A black car was idling at the curb. Not flashy. A dark sedan, clean. The kind of vehicle that was designed to be unnoticed. A driver got out when he saw them, opened the rear door without speaking, and looked somewhere past Adriana's shoulder in the practiced way of someone paid specifically to not register things. She stopped at the edge of the curb. Damien stopped beside her, not pushing. The door was open. The car was waiting. He wasn't moving toward it or away from it, just present. She understood, one with sudden clarity, that he was genuinely giving her the choice. There was no performance of patience here. He would stand on this curb all afternoon if that was what she decided. "I'll take you wherever you want to go," he said. "Name it." Adriana opened her mouth and closed it. The apartment. The apartment was Marcus's, his name on the lease, his furniture, 3 years of her life organized into his square footage. She could go there technically. She had a key, but she pictured it, standing in that kitchen in this dress, surrounded by his things, waiting for him to come home or not come home, and the image was so intolerable that she discarded it immediately. Her parents' house was 40 minutes away and meant walking through their front door in a wedding gown and watching her mother's face do the thing her mother's face did. Collapse and reassemble simultaneously into the specific expression that meant, "I need to understand every detail right now," and fielding 200 questions she didn't have answers to yet. She loved her parents. She could not be with them tonight. She had friends. She had colleagues. She had a life that was fully, structurally, her own in every way, except that it had been organized, for 3 years, around the assumption that she was about to marry Marcus Hale. She had nowhere. The recognition wasn't devastating. It was just accurate. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said. She said it the way she would have stated a measurement on a blueprint, not with self-pity, no, but because it was the precise truth, and there was no point in approximate answers. Damien nodded once, like this was information he was filing rather than reacting to. "Then come with me. I have a property in the city. You'll have a private room, your own bathroom, and access to whatever you need. My staff won't bother you." He paused. "It's not permanent. It's just tonight or a few days, however long until you have a better option. The decision is yours at every point." She looked at the car, then at him. "You understand why this is an absurd situation," she said. "Completely," he said. "Get in anyway." She got in. The townhouse was on a quiet street in one of the city's older residential neighborhoods. 4 stories of dark brick, bay windows, iron railings. The kind of building that had been standing long enough to have opinions about the ones around it. Not a penthouse, not a compound, just a serious, private, well-maintained house that communicated its owner's priorities clearly. Security over spectacle. Inside, it was clean and spare. Good furniture, chosen for quality rather than impression. No art that was trying to prove anything. A woman in her 50s met them in the entry hall. Damien's housekeeper, Adriana guessed, from the way she received their arrival, with the calm efficiency of someone for whom unexpected guests were a professional category rather than a social one. Damien said something quiet to her. She nodded and disappeared without looking at Adriana in a way that felt like courtesy rather than avoidance. He led Adriana upstairs himself. The guest room was on the 2nd floor. It was simple and clean, a proper bed, a window overlooking a courtyard, an ensuite bathroom. Nothing performative about it. He opened the door, let her look at it, and then showed her the lock. "From the inside," he said, demonstrating the bolt. "Once that's thrown, no one opens this door. Not me, not my staff, not anyone. If you need something, there's a number on the bedside table. You call it, and whoever answers will leave whatever you need outside the door. You can open it when you're ready." He crossed to the bedside table, picked up a phone, not his personal one, a separate one, and held it out to her. "Call anyone you want. Check anything you want to check." He said it evenly, without defensiveness. "I'd rather you were certain than comfortable." Adriana took the phone. She looked at him. He was already moving toward the door, giving her the room, and she understood that this too was deliberate, not a retreat, but a demonstration. He was showing her, by leaving, that staying wasn't a condition of anything. "Damien," she said. He paused in the doorway, without turning all the way around. "Why?" she asked. "Not why did you stop me in the hallway, or why did you say those words at the altar. Just, why? The whole of it." He was quiet for a moment. "My sister," he said finally, "made a choice a long time ago to stay somewhere she should have left because she didn't think she had another option. She didn't know there were other options." He paused. "You had options. You just needed someone to keep the room clear long enough for you to see them." He left. The door closed softly behind him. Adriana stood in the middle of a stranger's guest room in her wedding dress, holding a phone that wasn't hers, in a house owned by a man whose name she hadn't known 3 hours ago. She sat on the edge of the bed. She opened the phone's browser. She typed Damien Rourke into the search bar. The results loaded. She read for 4 minutes without moving. Her posture stayed straight. She'd been raised with good posture. It was practically structural at this point. But her eyes moved very carefully across the screen, taking in each line with the same methodical attention she gave to load-bearing calculations. She was an architect. She understood the difference between the visible surface of a thing and what was holding it up. She read about him the way she would have read about a building she was being asked to assess, looking for what was real. There wasn't much. That was itself a kind of information. Men whose names produced this specific scarcity of verifiable detail. No social profiles, no company registrations, no quoted interviews. One photograph from a decade ago that may or may not have been him. Weren't private out of shyness. They were private because privacy, for them, was structural, intentional, load-bearing. But between the absence of facts, there were shapes. The kind you learned to read. References in news articles to investigations that had been closed. A name appearing in the margins of 3 separate federal proceedings without ever being charged. A journalist's piece from 6 years ago, since deleted, but archived, that had described him as the most organized man in a disorganized industry. And someone the people who know him are careful never to speak about publicly. She put the phone face down on her knee. She sat with it for a moment. Then she reached behind her, found the first of the 32 buttons running down the back of her gown, and began the slow, methodical work of undoing them. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know what tomorrow looked like, or next week, or what she was going to tell her mother, or how she was going to get her drafting files off the computer in Marcus's apartment, or what it meant that the most stable she'd felt all day was in a stranger's car going somewhere she hadn't chosen. She didn't know any of it, but she knew this. She had locked the door from the inside. That was hers. That was the one thing, tonight, that was entirely and only hers, when she decided it was enough to start with. The first morning, Adriana woke at 6:30 from habit rather than need. She lay still for 5 full minutes, orienting herself to the unfamiliar ceiling, the quality of light through curtains she hadn't chosen, the particular silence of a house that wasn't hers. Then she got up, showered, and discovered that someone had left folded clothes outside her door. Simple things, well made, in approximately her size. A note on top, handwritten. These should work until you retrieve your own. No obligation. MM, she assumed, was the housekeeper. She dressed and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for a French press on the counter, still warm, and a second mug set out beside it. She poured coffee and stood at the window overlooking the courtyard, watching early light move across brick, and tried to inventory what her life looked like from this specific coordinates. She had her phone. She'd asked the housekeeper to retrieve it from the venue, which the woman had done without comment. She had 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, and 6 voicemails from her mother alone. She had not opened any of them yet. She would, soon. Just not in the first 60 seconds of consciousness. She had her professional email still, her client files backed up to the cloud, and 3 projects mid-development that were legally and contractually hers, regardless of where she was physically sleeping. She had no address, no forwarding mail, no keys to anything that mattered. But she had coffee and a window, and a kitchen someone had left available to her without making it feel like charity. It was, she decided, enough to work with. By day 3, a pattern had established itself without either of them announcing it. Adriana had claimed the dining table. Not permanently. She wasn't colonizing the man's house, but functionally as a work surface. She'd set up her laptop there on the second day, opened her current project files, and simply continued. She was an architect. She had deadlines. The fact that her personal life had detonated in a public venue did not pause the structural engineering timeline on a mixed-use development in the West End. She worked in the kind of focused silence she'd always preferred. Headphones in, classical music low, the rest of the world compressed down to calculations and elevations, and the specific problem of how to move people efficiently through a 17-story building without making them feel managed. Damien passed through occasionally, to the kitchen, to his office on the ground floor, out the front door on errands she didn't ask about. He never interrupted. He'd glance at her work the way someone might glance at a weather report. Brief, assessing, not intrusive, and continue on. Once she'd looked up and caught him pausing to read the plan spread across the table. He'd met her eyes, nodded once in what seemed to be approval of something, and kept walking. They ate breakfast in the same room most mornings. Not together exactly. Just concurrently. He took his coffee black and read the news on a tablet. She took hers with milk and reviewed notes from the previous day. They existed in parallel, carefully, like two people sharing an armrest on a long flight who had wordlessly negotiated the terms. On the fifth morning, he broke the pattern. "You should know what you're staying in," he said. She looked up from her laptop. He was standing near the counter, coffee in hand, dressed for the day in dark trousers and a pressed shirt, sleeves already rolled to his forearms. The neck tattoo was visible above the collar. He looked, as always, like a man who had built his life out of deliberate choices and maintained it through sheer sustained attention. "All right," she said. He sat down. Not across from her. That would have felt like an interrogation, but at the angle, where they could see each other without it being confrontational. "I run operations most people don't want their names attached to," he said. "Shipping routes, supply chains, enforcement when agreements fall apart. Some of it is legal. Most of it exists in the space where legality is more a matter of paperwork than principle." He paused. "I have enemies, people whose money I've taken, people whose operations I've disrupted, people who would be professionally satisfied if I disappeared. The security here isn't decorative." Adriana set her coffee down. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" "I'm telling you that I operate in a world with consequences, and proximity to me means proximity to those consequences. You should make decisions with accurate information." She appreciated that he didn't soften it. She'd spent 3 years with Marcus, who had softened everything: his dissatisfaction, his affair, his decision to leave. Until the truth was so padded, it became unrecognizable. This was the opposite. Damien was handing her the facts with the edges still on. "Do you hurt people?" she asked. "When they've earned it," he said. "I don't start conflicts, but I finish them." "Earned it how?" "They broke agreements. They endangered people under my protection. They mistook patience for weakness." He met her eyes. "I have a code. It's not the legal code, but it's consistent. People know where they stand with me." She thought about that. "What's the code?" "Keep your word, don't involve civilians. Don't mistake cruelty for strength." He paused. "And if you take something from someone weaker than you just because you can, you'll answer for it." Adriana found herself nodding slightly. Not in approval exactly, in recognition. She was an architect. She understood the concept of structural integrity, that a thing could be sound without being sanctioned. That rules could be internally coherent, even when they existed outside official frameworks. "I don't need you to approve," Damien said. "I'm just asking you not to be naive about it." "I'm not naive," she said. "I looked you up. I know. And you're still letting me stay here." "You're not a security risk," he said. "You're someone who needed a door that wasn't the one being offered. That's different." She looked at him for a long moment. Marcus had always needed her approval, of his decisions, his career moves, his feelings. He'd needed her to agree that he was good, that he was trying, that the problems in their relationship were shared equally, even when they weren't. It had been exhausting, that constant negotiation of his self-image. Damien wasn't asking for approval. He was asking for informed presence. It was startling. And then, sucked as she sat with it, quietly refreshing. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." He nodded once and stood, taking his coffee with him. The conversation was over. He'd delivered the information. What she did with it was hers to decide. She went back to her plans. But she thought about the code. The letter arrived on day 9. Adriana had been expecting contact from Marcus eventually. Some attempt to explain, to apologize, to reframe what had happened in a way that let him feel better about it. She had not been expecting official correspondence from the State Architectural Licensing Board. The housekeeper brought it to her at the dining table mid-morning, along with 2 other pieces of forwarded mail. Adriana opened it without much thought. Probably a routine renewal notice. Maybe a continuing education requirement. And read the first paragraph 3 times before the content fully registered. A formal ethics complaint had been filed against her license. The complainant was a former client from a project 2 years prior, a residential renovation that had been completed on time, on budget, with all permits properly filed and no issues at occupancy. The complaint alleged cost overruns, unauthorized design changes, and failure to disclose structural complications. All of it was false. She read it again. Then she read the second page, which detailed the investigation process, the hearing date, the potential consequences if the board found merit in the allegations. Her hands were shaking, not the way they'd shaken in the hallway at the venue. That had been the body releasing held tension. This was different. This was rage. She knew exactly what this was. The client listed in the complaint had been referred to her by Marcus's mother. The project had been flawless. This wasn't about the work. This was about erasing her professionally because Marcus's family couldn't erase what had happened at the wedding. She stood up so fast, her chair scraped against the floor. Damien was crossing through the hallway. He stopped when he saw her face. She held up the letter. "They're trying to take my license." He came into the dining room, didn't reach for the letter, just looked at her. "Who?" "Marcus's father, City Councilman Gerald Hale." Her voice was level, but her hands were not. "He's using some fabricated complaint from an old project to destroy my career. This is—" She stopped, took a breath. "This is systematic. This is deliberate. This is them trying to make sure I can't recover from what he did." Damien read her face the way he'd read her architectural plans, carefully, taking in the full structure of what he was seeing. "Can you fight it?" "Yes. It's all documented. I have emails, contracts, photographs, signed approvals. I can prove every single allegation is false." She set the letter down on the table before she crumpled it. "But the process takes months. And in the meantime, my license is under investigation, which means I can't bid new projects, can't sign off on permits, can't—" She heard her voice rising and pulled it back down. "They know exactly what they're doing." "They do," Damien agreed quietly. She looked at him. "I'm sorry, this isn't your problem." "You're in my house," he said. "That makes it adjacent to my problem." She almost laughed. It came out bitter. "Adjacent?" He was quiet for a moment, watching her. Then he said, "You're angry." "Yes." "Good," he said. "You should be." That stopped her. She'd been angry exactly 3 times in her adult life that she could remember, and each time someone had told her to calm down, to not overreact, to consider the other person's perspective. Marcus had been exceptional at it, turning her anger into something she had to defend rather than something that simply was. Damien had just said good. "I'm going to fight this," she said. "I know. I'm going to document every single false claim and present it so clearly they'll have no choice but to dismiss it." "You will?" he said. He paused. "And if you want help making sure it reaches the right people quickly, let me know." She looked at him. "What kind of help?" "The kind that ensures the people making decisions have complete information before they decide anything." His expression didn't change. "I know some people. I can make some calls." "Damien, you'll still do the work," he said. "You'll still win it on merit. I'd just make sure the right people are paying attention when you do." She understood what he was offering, not interference, attention, which, in this city, from the right person, could be as structural as any load-bearing wall. "Let me think about it," she said. "Take your time." He left her to it. That night, she heard him on the phone in his office. She wasn't eavesdropping. She was passing by to get water, but his voice carried. He wasn't being loud. He was being clear. She caught 3 sentences. "I need you to look into something. Gerald Hale. Hi, I want to know where he keeps things he doesn't want found." She filled her glass and went back upstairs. She didn't ask about it, but she slept better than she had in 9 days. Joey showed up on day 11. Adriana was at the dining table when a young man in a faded jacket came through the front door like he lived there, called out "Boss?" to the general air, and stopped short when he saw her instead. "Oh," he said. Hi." "Hi," Adriana said. They looked at each other. He was 19, maybe 20, with the specific energy of someone still growing into his own height. Good kid's face, nervous hands. "I'm Joey," he said. "I work for Damien. Run errands, mostly. Drive sometimes." He paused. "You're the architect." "Adriana," she said. "Yes." "Cool, he said you were here. Just didn't expect—" He gestured vaguely at the dining table setup. "Didn't expect you to be working." "I have deadlines," she said. "Right. Yeah, that makes sense." He shifted his weight. "Is he around?" "Office, I think." Joey nodded and started to head that direction, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What's it like?" he asked. "Working for yourself. Like, really doing your own thing, not waiting for someone to tell you if it's good enough." The question surprised her. "It's terrifying," she said honestly, "and necessary." "Yeah?" He looked genuinely interested. "You spend your whole life learning the rules," she said, "and then you realize the rules were written to keep you asking permission. Actually doing the work means deciding you don't need permission anymore." Joey absorbed that. "That's what Damien says." Different words, but same thing. He's right. He usually is. Joey grinned. "Drives me crazy." Over the next few days, Joey became a regular presence. He'd come by to pick things up, drop things off, check in with Damien. And somehow, he kept ending up in conversations with Adriana. First about work, then about other things. He was bright, eager, and nursing a recently ended relationship that he couldn't quite stop picking at, like a healing wound. On day 13, he asked her directly, "How do you know if someone actually loves you? Like really loves you, not just says it?" Adriana set down her pencil. This was not a casual question. This was the question he'd been building toward for 3 days. "Tell me about her," she said. So he did. And as he talked, Adriana heard the patterns, the ways his ex-girlfriend had needed constant reassurance, constant proof, constant modification of Joey's behavior to accommodate her feelings. The ways she'd made him responsible for her emotional state. The ways she'd told him that leaving would devastate her, that he was the only person who understood her, that if he really loved her, he'd do this one thing, and this one thing, and this one thing. When he finished, Adriana said quietly, "That's not love. That's control that looks like love." Joey went very still. "Real love," she continued, "doesn't require you to dismantle yourself to fit. It doesn't ask you to prove it constantly. It doesn't make you responsible for another person's entire emotional architecture." She met his eyes. "Love that respects you gives you room to exist. It doesn't shrink you." "But she said she needed me," Joey said. "Need isn't love," Adriana said, "and making you responsible for her needs isn't partnership. It's coercion wrapped in vocabulary that sounds like care." Joey stared at the table. I thought I was being a bad boyfriend, because I wanted space sometimes, because I wanted to see my friends." "You weren't bad," Adriana said firmly. "You were sane." He looked up at her. "How do you know this?" "Because I spent 3 years in a relationship where I shaped myself into the person someone else needed me to be," she said. "And when it fell apart, I realized I'd been holding up the entire structure by myself the whole time. That's not partnership. That's architecture where one person is the foundation and the other person is just, wait." They sat with that for a moment. "Damien said you were smart," Joey said finally. "Damien's right more than he's wrong," Adriana said. Joey smiled a little. "That's what I said." From the doorway, Damien's voice. "I'm standing right here." They both turned. He was leaning against the frame, coffee in hand, expression unreadable, but not displeased. "How long have you been there?" Joey asked. "Long enough," Damien said. He looked at Adriana. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not quite approval. Something more personal. Recognition, maybe. That was good, he said quietly. What you just told him. That was true. I know, Adriana said. He nodded. I'll be in the office if you need me. He left them to it. Joey looked at Adriana. He doesn't usually say stuff like that. Like what? Like, that something was good. Or true. He's not big on compliments. Adriana thought about that. I don't think it was a compliment, she said. I think he was just stating a fact. With Damien, Joey said, that's the same thing. She supposed it was. That night, after Joey left, she went looking for Damien. Found him in the courtyard, sitting on the back steps with a glass of something amber. She sat down beside him without asking. They were quiet for a while. Then she said, Joey told me you lost your sister. He didn't look surprised. 7 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He took a drink. Car accident. Drunk driver. She was 23. That's how you knew, Adriana said. At the wedding. When you said she stayed somewhere because she thought she didn't have options. She was with someone who convinced her she was the problem, Damien said. Every time she tried to leave, he'd tell her she was overreacting, that she was too sensitive, that he was trying his best, so she stayed, right up until the night she was driving to our parents' house to tell them she'd finally ended it. Adriana felt something cold settle in her chest. The driver wasn't him, Damien said. Just some random drunk kid who ran a red light. But she wouldn't have been on that road at that time if she'd left 6 months earlier, when she first knew she should. That's not... I know, he said. Causation isn't that simple. But I also know she waited because someone made her believe waiting was what you did when you loved someone. And I can't get her back. But I can make sure that when I see someone standing where she stood, I don't walk away. She understood then. Why he'd stayed at the wedding. Why he'd offered the car, the room, the lock on the door. Not because he pitied her, because he'd failed someone he loved once, and he decided he wouldn't fail anyone else that way again. Thank you, she said. He looked at her then. For what? For seeing me, she said, instead of the story. He held her gaze. You're not a story. You're a person who made a decision under pressure. That's just architecture. She smiled. That's just architecture, she repeated. Everything is, he said. They sat together on the steps and watched the courtyard darken, and Adriana thought, this is what it feels like when protection doesn't cost you your agency. When care doesn't require you to collapse into it. It felt, she realized, like a foundation she could actually build on. The formal hearing notice arrived on day 16. Adriana read it standing in the kitchen, coffee going cold in her hand, and felt the particular clarity that comes when abstract threat becomes concrete schedule. The State Architectural Licensing Board had reviewed the complaint and determined there was sufficient cause to proceed. She was summoned to appear before a disciplinary panel in 12 days to respond to allegations of professional misconduct. 12 days to prepare a defense for work she'd done flawlessly 2 years ago. She set the notice down and got to work. Over the next week and a half, she built her case the way she built everything, methodically, with attention to structural integrity. She compiled every email, every signed change order, every approved drawing, every photograph documenting the work at every stage. She reconstructed the entire project timeline in a presentation so clear that anyone reviewing it would see immediately that the allegations were fabricated. Damien watched her work with the same quiet attention he'd shown from the beginning. He didn't ask about it, didn't offer advice she hadn't requested, just kept the space clear so she could do what she needed to do. On the 10th night, she stayed up until 3 a.m., reviewing documents. When she finally closed her laptop, she found a plate of food someone had left on the side table, still warm, covered with a cloth. She ate it standing at the window, looking out at the courtyard, and thought, this is what support looks like when it doesn't ask you to be smaller. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. On Wednesday night, Damien left the house at 8:15. Adriana was in the guest room, doing a final review of her presentation. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the front door close, heard the car pull away. She noted it the way she noted weather, present but not requiring her immediate attention. She didn't know where he was going. She wouldn't know what happened there until much later. The room Damien chose was neutral territory, a private dining room in a restaurant that asked no questions, in a part of the city where people went specifically to not be noticed. He'd arrived first, as was his practice. The room was small, well-appointed, with a single table and 4 chairs, and he sat with his back to the wall and waited. Marcus arrived 7 minutes late, which Damien read as a small act of defiance that Marcus probably thought was meaningful. He came alone, as instructed. Looked around the room like he was expecting something else, security maybe, or theatrics. Found only Damien sitting calmly at the table, hands folded, a small black hard drive sitting on the surface between them. "Sit down," Damien said. It wasn't a request. Marcus sat. He was trying for confidence, shoulders back, eye contact steady. But there was something frayed at the edges of him. A man who'd made a spectacular choice and was slowly realizing the cost of it was still being calculated. "I don't know what you think this is," Marcus started. "But I'm not—" "Your father filed a fraudulent ethics complaint against Adriana Voss," Damien said, cutting through the posturing like it wasn't there. "Using a former client he has personal connections to. The allegations are false. You know this. I know this. The question is what happens next." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Damien's voice was perfectly level. "Your father is a city councilman with a long career and a short memory for his own misconduct. He's protecting your reputation by destroying hers. It's systematic, it's deliberate, and it ends now." "You can't prove—" Damien picked up the hard drive and set it directly in front of Marcus. "This contains 11 years of your family's financial records," he said. "Tax filings that don't match actual income. Campaign funds redirected to personal accounts. A zoning decision in 2019 that netted your uncle $4 million on a property deal that should never have been approved." He paused. "It's very thorough, very detailed, very verifiable." Marcus stared at the drive like it was a live explosive. "How did you—" "Your father made enemies before you were born," Damien said. "I simply know where they keep things. People talk to me, Marcus. They tell me where the documentation is. They give me access because I've spent 15 years making sure that when I ask for something, it's in their interest to say yes." Marcus's face had gone white. "This is extortion." "No," Damien said calmly. "This is information. Extortion would be if I demanded money. I'm demanding something much simpler." He leaned forward slightly. "The complaint against Adriana Voss gets withdrawn. Completely. Before 9 a.m. tomorrow. No residual investigation. No mark on her record. It disappears like it never existed." "And if I don't?" "Then this drive gets delivered to 3 federal journalists simultaneously within the hour," Damien said. "They're already expecting it. They're already interested. I've made sure of that." He paused. "Your father's career ends. Your family's reputation collapses. And Adriana still wins her hearing because her documentation is flawless. The difference is whether your family is still standing when she does." Marcus's hands were shaking. "You can't do this." "I can," Damien said, "and I will. The only question is what you choose." "Why?" The word came out raw. "Why do you even care? You don't know her. She's nothing to you." Damien's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very cold. "She's someone your family tried to erase because you couldn't handle the consequences of your own choices. That makes it my concern." "This is insane." "No," Damien said quietly. "What's insane is thinking you could humiliate someone in front of 250 people and then systematically destroy her livelihood when she didn't collapse on command." He stood. "You have until 9 a.m. Make the call. Tell your father to withdraw it, Or don't, and live with what happens next. He picked up the hard drive, held it for a moment, and then set it back down on the table. You can keep that, he said, as a reminder of how much I know. The copies are already distributed to people who will use them the moment I give the word. He walked to the door, then paused. Marcus, he said, not turning around. She was always going to win. Her work is documented, her case is airtight, and she's better at her job than you ever were at pretending to be a decent person. All you're deciding right now is whether your father goes down with you. He left. Marcus sat alone at the table, staring at the hard drive, and tried to figure out how everything had gotten so far away from him so fast. At 8:47 a.m. the next morning, he made the call. Adriana was in the kitchen, dressed for the hearing in a charcoal suit she'd had delivered from her storage unit, reviewing her notes one final time, when her phone rang. The number was from the licensing board's main office. She answered. This is Adriana Voss. Ms. Voss, this is the State Architectural Licensing Board. I'm calling to inform you that the complaint filed against your license has been formally withdrawn by the complainant. The case is closed. Your license remains in full standing with no investigation on record. Adriana went very still. I'm sorry, withdrawn? Yes, ma'am. The complainant submitted a notarized letter this morning retracting all allegations and confirming there was no basis for the complaint. The board has reviewed and accepted the withdrawal. You are no longer required to appear at today's hearing. Did they say why? No, ma'am. Just that the complaint was filed in error, and they wished to correct the record immediately. Adriana thanked her, ended the call, and stood in the kitchen holding her phone. She knew. She didn't know the specifics, didn't know the how or the where, or the exact words used. But she knew the shape of what had happened, the way an architect knows load distribution, by understanding what forces were acting on the structure and where the pressure had been applied. She went looking for Damien, found him in his office on a call. He saw her in the doorway and held up one finger. 1 minute. She waited. He finished the conversation, set the phone down, and looked at her with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. The complaint was withdrawn, she said. I heard, he said. You did this. The complainant withdrew it, he said. That's what happened. Damien. He stood, came around the desk, and faced her directly. You were going to win it yourself. Your documentation was flawless. Your case was airtight. I just made it faster. How? I had a conversation with Marcus, presented some information his family would prefer, stayed private, gave him a choice. He paused. He made the right one. Adriana felt something hot and complicated move through her chest. You blackmailed him? I gave him information and options, Damien said. What he did with them was his choice. That's not... She stopped. Started again. I was handling it. I know you were. I didn't need you to fix it. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. You can be angry if you want. That's fair. She was angry. She was angry because he'd gone around her, because he'd made a move she hadn't authorized, because he'd taken something out of her hands that she'd been fully capable of managing herself. She was also angry because it had worked. And underneath the anger was something else she didn't have simple words for. The recognition that someone had watched her prepare to fight and decided the fight didn't need to happen. Not because she couldn't win it, but because the cost of making her fight a fabricated case was offensive to him on a level that superseded polite boundaries. You should have told me, she said. Probably, he agreed. I would have told you not to do it. I know. And you did it anyway. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back, not apologizing, not defending, just present with the decision he'd made and ready to accept whatever she did with that. You couldn't watch a lie win, she said finally. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. No, he said quietly. I couldn't. She stood there for a long moment, saw anger and gratitude and something deeper, all moving through her simultaneously. Then she nodded once and left the office. She went upstairs, sat on the edge of the guest bed, and let herself feel all of it without organizing it into something coherent. By evening, the anger had settled into something else. Not approval exactly, but acceptance. The recognition that Damien operated by a code that wasn't hers, but wasn't incomprehensible either. He'd seen an injustice aimed at someone under his roof and decided that the most efficient solution was also the correct one. She couldn't quite be angry at that. 3 days later, she signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from the townhouse. She'd found it herself, toured it herself, negotiated the terms herself. The deposit came from her own account. Her name was the only name on the contract. It felt like a corner she'd turned without realizing she was approaching it. On moving day, which consisted of exactly one bag of clothes and her laptop, since everything else would come from storage later, she stood in Damien's front hallway with the bag over her shoulder. He came down the stairs, saw her, and stopped. "You're leaving," he said. "I am." She paused. "Thank you, for all of it. The room, the space, the—" She gestured vaguely at the shape of the past 3 weeks. "Everything." He nodded. "You're welcome." She looked at him. This man who had intervened without permission, who had offered protection without asking for payment, who had given her exactly what she needed and nothing she didn't. She didn't know what they were to each other now. She suspected neither did he. Will I see you again?" she asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't plan things like that," he said finally. She smiled. It was the first full, unguarded smile she'd produced since the wedding. Maybe longer. "Neither do I," she said. "Anymore." He almost smiled back. She could see it at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. She left through the front door, down the steps, into the afternoon light that was completely indifferent to the fact that something significant was ending, and something else was beginning. She got into the car she'd called herself, gave the driver the address of her new apartment, and watched the townhouse disappear behind her. She felt, for the first time in 3 years, like she was moving towards something rather than away from it. A week later, Adriana was at her new dining table, smaller than Damien's, less formal, entirely hers, working on revisions for the West End project when someone knocked on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She looked through the peephole. Damien stood in the hallway holding 2 bags of takeout. She opened the door. They looked at each other for a moment. He didn't explain himself, didn't offer a reason for being there, just stood with the takeout like a man who had made a decision and followed through on it. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was probably a lie, but a polite one. "No, you weren't," she said. "No," he agreed. "I wasn't." She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." He did. She took the bags from him, set them on the counter, and started unpacking containers while he looked around the apartment with the same assessing attention he'd given everything else, not judging, just noting. The layout, the light, the way she'd already started to organize the space. "It's good," he said. "It's mine," she said. "That's what I meant." They ate at her table, the small one, the one she'd picked out herself, and talked about nothing particularly important. Work, the city, a restaurant Joey had recommended that turned out to serve portions sized for people twice his age. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation 2 people have when they've already seen each other at their worst, and decided the worst wasn't disqualifying. When he left 2 hours later, she walked him to the door. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Thank you for opening the door," he said. She looked at him. "I'll probably do it again." "Good," he said. "I'll probably knock again." He left. She closed the door, her door, to her apartment, in her life that she was building with her own hands, and leaned against it for a moment, smiling at nothing in particular. No grand vow, no declarations, no possession, just a door, opened freely by a woman who finally knew her own worth. and a man who, for the first time in 7 years, was willing to step through one. The groom didn't realize who he had just offended, but more than that, he didn't realize what he had just set free. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.